Well, welcome everyone. This is our second to last session, and today we're going to be talking about living in a multi-religious world. We'll talk a little bit about some theories about why we've got so many religions, why I think it's important to have this interreligious dialogue, and then we'll give a brief overview of three of the major world religions we haven't touched on as much, and maybe draw a few lessons from them. It'll be Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism. This cartoon, I don't know how well you can see that, but you have these two aliens in the spaceship, and they're looking at the world that's being blown up. And what they're saying, as near as I can tell, they're fighting over which religion is the most peaceful. From a philosophical standpoint, why do we have so many different religions? And what do we make of that? Well, to me, there's several different options. First option is the atheist one. That is, all of these multiple religions are all false. We've talked a couple times about Oxford biology professor Richard Dawkins, who wrote The God Delusion, one of the foremost kind of atheist experts today, would argue that religion comes from evolutionary reasons, for reasons that we won't get into today, we've talked a number of times about, but that basically all religion can be explained through biology and through evolution. I'm not going to get into that debate today, because we're really talking about why we have these multiple religions and the differences. So let's assume, for example, that number one is false. Well, one of the more predominant and I think destructive views of multiple religions is that mine is right, but yours is wrong. And we can find this in almost every single religious tradition. And it's probably the root of more conflict, more wars, and more pain and destruction in the history of mankind than any other single view. And this is actually one of the reasons why Dawkins is so anti-religion, because of this viewpoint. Well, the problem with that is, how do we decide who's got a monopoly on the truth? And how do we judge which religion is the right one? I mean, what kind of metrics are we going to use? I mean, do we use the number of people that believe it? So we can say, well, Christianity is the largest religion in the world, so therefore it must be right. However, Islam is actually the fastest growing religion in the world, and at some point may overtake Christianity. So more people are being converted to Islam, maybe it's the right one. Well, maybe instead of looking at numbers, we should look at the effects of the religion. I think we could make a very strong argument that in terms of encouraging peace, whether it's within the individual, whether it's in the community, or certainly in the history of religious fundamentalism, religious wars, you could make this very strong argument that Buddhism is the most peaceful of all religions. As we're going to talk about in a few minutes, there's a strong argument that maybe it's the religion that's the most universal, that's the most all-encompassing. Is there one religion that could explain the existence of all the other religions? And Hindus would say, yes, our religion would do that. It is the most universal. Yours doesn't have to be false for ours to be true. Therefore, maybe it's the right religion. Or maybe if we turn to Judaism, if we look at what is the one religion where we've seen the most oppression over the millennia that Judaism has been around, whether you're talking about ancient Egypt, whether you're talking about Romans, whether you're talking about Holocaust, the Jews have been oppressed more than any other ethnic and religious group in history, and yet they still survive and they thrive. So maybe there's something fundamental about Judaism that makes it the right religion. Well, I disagree with all those points. I don't think that there's a way to say that one religion is right, and as we talk about in a minute, I think I'll explain why that is. So what are some other alternatives? Well, there's one theory that says all religions are true, and they basically are saying the same thing. This is called a perennial philosophy. Some figures you guys may have heard of. The Enlightenment thinker Leibniz is one. Aldous Huxley is another. And Houston Smith, I've got a quote from him later on. Any of you that are interested in a kind of an overview of world religions, he's got a book. It's probably the most well-known called World Religions. And he's retired now. I think he's still alive, but he's pretty old. But a fantastic book. So they're believers of the perennial philosophy. And basically what they do is they look at all these religions and they say, any religion that we look at, we can start to find certain universal truths. But the problem with this is also, as we look at these religions, that we find differences, and not just differences, we find absolute contradictions between them. So how can they really be true? Now, a perennial philosopher would say, well, those things are culturally based. But I'm not sure that that explanation really gets to the heart of why we have all of these differences. And while yes, I would agree with them that there are certain universal truths, I think in this view, it misses out on some of the cultural, the distinctions and the wonderful colors that we see in all the different religious traditions that are distinct, and it tends to gloss over some of those. The fourth option, and I'll put it right on the table, this is the one I subscribe to. It's similar to the perennial philosophy, but a little bit different. It's called the pluralistic theory. Great book on this, John Hick, Interpretation of Religion. And what Professor Hick's view is he starts out with the assumption or the philosophical statement that behind this everyday reality that we live in, there's something deeper. There's a deeper meaning, a deeper power. Some of us call that God. Some philosophers refer to this as ultimate reality. He calls it the real. So that there is something the real, there's this everyday reality, and then there's the really real reality that underlies that. In different religions, it may go by different names. Nirvana, it may go by Brahman, it may go by Allah. But the fundamental idea that there is something underneath reality that's more fundamental. However, this something is infinite, encompasses infinity. It's also ineffable. Ineffable means it's indescribable. So the human finite mind cannot ultimately wrap itself around the infinite. We can only grasp parts of it. So therefore, in our human experience, as we experience this infinite divine, we're going to do it through the lens of our culture, the time that we live in, our languages, and the history. And therefore, this infinite ultimate reality, as we experience a piece of that infinity, we're only going to get a piece of that, a part of that. And it's going to be colored by the world that we live in, the languages that we speak, and our own personal experiences. And however, we do still have these contradictions. So, for example, in Buddhism, there is no all-powerful God that we turn to for salvation. There is not this concept of a Christ-like figure. So what do we do about these contradictions? Well, if we assume that the underlying reality, the ultimate reality, the real, the ultimate divine, whatever name we want to call this, is truly infinite, and we're only seeing a part of this, then you would actually expect there to be contradictions, because infinity can encompass contradictions. So, for example, you flip a coin in the air, heads or tails. Which is the right answer? Well, you do it enough times, both are right. You get both examples, even though heads is the opposite of tails. So here's a couple ways of thinking about this. One way, what is this up there, the image?
Prism.
It's a prism, right? We all learned about this in junior high or high school. So you pass a light, so a pure white light through a prism, and what do we get? We get a color spectrum. We get a rainbow of colors. So white light doesn't look like red, blue, orange, or green, does it? It's something different. If we think of the white light as being the ultimate reality, the pure light, and I think it's very interesting that in almost every religious tradition, you find the metaphor of light with salvation, with mystical experiences. So anyway, let's assume that the light is the ultimate reality. Well, we see this through a lens. So we're only going to see a certain color of that depending on what our culture is. I may look at this, and if I've got my colored blinders on, I may see red. You may see blue. You might see green. We can sit here and get in an argument over what is light. If I'm only seeing red, you're only seeing blue, you're only seeing green, we may each be adamant. No, this is ultimate reality. It's red, it's blue, it's green. In reality, we're each right and we're each wrong. That it's not completely ultimate reality. We're each seeing what we are seeing. And they are very different, but they're all part of the infinite spectrum that is visible light. Another view, and this is a great parable that the Buddha came up with, and using a little bit out of context, but he says, I know there are only 3 men up there, it's called the blind man and the elephant. So what the Buddha says is, take a group of 4 men that are blind, and lead them to an elephant. And they each grasp a different part of the elephant. One blind man grasps the trunk and says, you've led me to a hose. Second blind man says, no, what are you talking about? A hose, you're totally wrong. He's holding the tail. So there's no hose, there's no hole in this. This is a rope. Third blind man says, I don't know what either of you guys, are smoking, but this is a wall, because he's over on the side of the elephant. He said, this is not, a skinny, this is a big wall. And the fourth blind man says, no, 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 no. This thing moves around, it's round, he's holding on the leg, it's a pillar. Each of these men is blind. They're not seeing the entire picture of reality. Each of us is blind. We're finite creatures trying to understand the infinite. We're trying to grasp the elephant, but we're limited in how we can see.